Good morning, everyone, and welcome to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. I am located at 1563 Main Street in Peckville, and I'm here every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. with you to provide landowners valuable information that you need regarding the natural gas development here in Pennsylvania. And if you're looking for landowner information, then this is the show for you. At the Clark Law Firm, my focus is on landowner and only landowner representation. I have been doing this show since August of 2010, and I represent landowners in the past and continue to represent landowners for such items as gas lease negotiations, and we're going to talk about gas lease issues today quite a bit. Pipeline and water line agreements. I've done the last show or two focusing a lot on pipelines, and a good time here to say that, if you've missed any of the prior shows, you can go back to pagasleaseattorney.com and pipelineattorney.com. We post the shows up there, and we also start putting them now on YouTube. So you can go check out YouTube, type in All Things Marcellus. You can even go to the iTunes podcast section, type in All Things Marcellus there. 150 plus, way over, I think, 150 plus shows. So over 150 plus hours of shows. Now, I do caution people, and I say, look, you want to make sure that you're listening to, if you want a gas leasing show and you're considering a gas lease today, well, you may not want to listen to the show from back in, the fall of 2010, because the market has changed drastically. And the markets continue to change, just like with the pipeline agreements. Today we're typically able to get much better terms, often much more compensation than we were able to obtain in the past. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, but I'm not going to talk too much or about pipelines today. I want to talk a lot about gas leasing, but also as far as what I do, been representing more of my clients for estate planning issues as they start transitioning into the royalty phase and start to see that, hey, this is actually happening, and we're starting to get some proceeds and royalty payments, and we want to make sure that we're looking at what are we going to do for our children, grandchildren, things of that nature. So doing more of that as also the development is going, doing a lot of surface use agreements like well site agreements, meter site agreements, roadway agreements, and those are things, it's really important that you are getting assistance with these things, because it's the contracts themselves that they offer you, just like the lease contract that you're initially offered. There's a lot of terms in there that could be problematic. And I see, with these roadway agreements is something that, are really driving me crazy, because I know that landowners are out there and are signing these really bad roadway agreements. And you're not getting basic items like indemnification in the event that there's an accident on a roadway and you're exposed to liability or a lawsuit at least. And that's something, that you just must have. And if you know to ask for it, then usually you're going to get it. But is it going to be the protection that you need? All terms are not equal. So when you see the word indemnification, or you see a headline indemnification, well, that could be written, 1,000 different ways. So you need to make sure that it's written a way that you're comfortable with. And that's just a basic item. The other thing, and I've talked about roadway agreements recently, and again, I encourage you, go check out the website, pagasleaseattorney.com. And I've talked about this recently. You really need to look at these, because a lot of people, in my opinion, are flat out being duped by the companies where they're saying, hey, we want to do this, we're just going to develop your property, we can do it under the lease, sometimes they'll even say. And the question is that really true? Can they actually do that under the lease? And you really need to know that, and you need to understand that, because I'm seeing it all the time where landowners are signing these agreements without asking or knowing to ask. It's not their fault. You just don't know to ask the right questions. So you really need to look at this a lot of times. And here I go getting a little bit stuck on the roadways, but it's a really important subject. You need to ask these right questions, because you could end up, if you're in clean and green, you could end up having yearly taxes of up to, at this time even, $1,000 or $1,500 per acre impact, meaning that if this roadway is going to take an acre of your property, and these can sometimes take several acres depending upon the length, well, that area, in most cases, if you're in clean and green, is going to be taken out of the clean and green program. which then means that you're going to have to pay a regular tax rate. Some companies use a fair market value tax rate, which is lower than what other counties do. I think it's counties. Other counties use the commercial tax rate, which can range right now, and obviously we don't think the taxes are going down, but can range now, we're seeing between $1,000 and $1,500 per acre. So that's an increase on a yearly basis. So if you sign a roadway agreement for $750 or $1,000 or even a couple $1,000, and then all of a sudden you find out a couple years later when you get this tax notice that you have a yearly increase in your taxes of $1,000 to $1,500, you're not going to be too happy about that. And that's going to be there as long as the roadway is going to be there. Now, on top of that, maybe you could have said no to this roadway, that you didn't even have to agree to it, which means that you can either say no or you can negotiate a higher price or better terms. That higher price may justify agreeing to it. The terms may be that if you have this increased taxes, that the company would have to pay that increase on a yearly basis. So maybe that makes it more agreeable, which makes sense. So, you got to know to ask these questions, because a mistake like that, by not asking the questions and by not getting that covered, and believe me, none of these companies, I've not seen a roadway yet where the company is presenting the information to the landowner and saying, hey, here's what could happen with this clean and green. Haven't seen it, and I don't think that we ever will. They'll say, oh yeah, we're paying the back taxes, the back taxes, the back taxes. A lot of times they don't even say that. But back taxes are one thing, and that's great. But what about the future increase? The future increase, because that's going to be constant, and that can be 50 plus years. So you have to look at those things. And again, I'm sorry to jump on that again, but it's just something I'm seeing every week. Every week I'm seeing this. As this development occurs, you see it more and more, and you have to understand and you have to defend against this. You have to ask the right questions. Again, I am Attorney Doug Clark. This is All Things Marcellus. We're here every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m., just finishing up, representing landowners, obviously, in royalty issues. If you're getting royalties, or even if you're not getting royalties and say you're leased to Chesapeake, but if you're getting royalties and you want a free confidential evaluation as to whether I believe that your royalties are receiving deductions that are not authorized under the terms of your lease agreement, we do those for free. I do. And you send me your lease, your royalty checks if you're getting them, and I'll let you know whether I feel, in my opinion, whether these deductions are permitted under the terms of your oil and gas lease. And I am going to talk about some royalty provisions today, because I'm going to talk about leasing. And of course, if you need any representation on any of these issues, you can always contact me directly, 570-307-0702. That's 570-307-0702. I also mentioned the websites. We're in the process of doing some major renovations. I've said that before, but finally, I'm very confident that we're going to be getting some things done here pretty soon. So make sure, if you haven't visited the websites in a while, it's not going to be this week, but over the next few weeks, you're going to see some changes, and we're really excited about these. So check out pagasleaseattorney.com, pipelineattorney.com, and in fact, check them out now, and then you can check them back if you don't go regularly, a couple weeks, and see what we do here. So I'm pretty excited about that. So again, pagasleaseattorney.com and pipelineattorney.com. And you can call me at 570-307-0702. Okay, so I said I want to talk about leasing today. And why I want to do this is I've been getting a lot of calls from Tioga County recently. And there's been a lot of leasing activity that's occurring in Tioga County. So I have several clients there and getting some other calls from Tioga County. Also, though, I have many active clients right now in leasing in Susquehanna County. Also, we're hitting some in Wyoming, and I have others in the western part of the state as well. But what I do is I like to talk about things on the show that are relevant in what I'm seeing in the this past week or the past few weeks. So one of the things I'm seeing a lot is this leasing in Tioga County. So right now, I would say that most of the leasing files that I have active right now are Tioga and Susquehanna County, but we have others, active across the state also. So what we're seeing in Tioga County is, and this is interesting, and please remember too, you may say, oh, he's going to talk about Tioga County. I'm not located there. Might as well tune out. Well, you could do that, but at the same time, these points and what we're going to talk about, there's relevance to these to anybody. And even if you're leased, you get some ideas. Hey, what might my lease say? How might this impact me in the future? But focusing here now for Tioga County. So what's going on? Well, what we're seeing in Tioga County now is a lot of leases, or a group of leases, not all that the people sign together, but as you know, there's been times where the landmen come pouring into the community and start signing leases. Well, it just so happens that about 5 years ago, landmen were pouring into Tioga County, signing leases. So many landowners in Tioga County signed leases about 5 years ago. So in the fall of 2009, many landowners were signing leases. So what happens now is that many of those leases had a 5-year term. Those leases are in the process of, or they're about to expire. Some are expiring this month. Some are expiring in the upcoming months. Some even at the beginning of next year. So a lot of these people have maybe leased to a company called East, who is very active, but it could be other companies as well. But their leases are about to expire. Well, East had transferred most of these leases or assigned them to Shell. So what's going on now is that Shell has landmen out in the community requesting landowners to sign what's called a top lease. And now if your lease expired already, then they're approaching you and asking you to sign a new lease. But let's talk about a top lease for a second. So say I had a lease that expired in a couple months. And one of the things that we're seeing is that landowners had signed leases 5 years ago in this area. And typically those leases were at about 15% royalty. Most I see are at 15% royalty. So what's going on now, what we've been seeing for the past several months, is the Shell landmen, on behalf of Shell, not employed necessarily by Shell, but out there, attempting to get people to sign what's called a top lease. And that top lease, what that's saying is that you have a current lease, but we want to have a new lease or a lease on top of your old lease. And this top lease, it will not kick in until your old lease expires. So if your old lease was going to expire in 2 months, we'd like to lease you right now in this new top lease, so there'll be no gap. Once your old lease expires, the top lease will kick in. Well, we want to lease you now, and this will be your new lease if your old lease expires. And certainly in almost all of these cases, it will expire. Well, one of the things we're seeing is that most often, it's been for a while, that the initial offer by the landmen and by the company is 12.5% royalty. Well, many of these individuals, like I said, these landowners, they signed and they have an active lease at 15% royalty. So it's a hard pill to swallow to go ahead and sign this new lease that may kick in a couple months, and again, in most cases certainly will, at a lower royalty percent than what you what you already signed less than 5 years ago, so you still have a couple months left. So, landowners really don't want to do that, and understandably so. So what we're seeing is we're starting to see, without getting into too much detail, that a company, when they have struggles to sign people, what do they have to do? Well, they're going to either have to raise some sort of aspect, whether it be a higher royalty percentage, a higher bonus. But if nobody's signing and they want the property, then they're going to have to obviously, sweeten the pot. And so we're starting to see that. And also, and I'm going to get back here, I'm over the break here, but we're going to see too the potential of some competition. And over this last week, started to sniff a little competition out there. And competition is always good for the landowner. Okay, we're up against the first break. You're listening to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark, here every Sunday from 8 to 9. And I'm going to be back talking about leases after this break. Welcome back to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. Again, you can listen to the show. You can go back to pagasleaseattorney.com, go back to pipelineattorney.com, and not just for the radio show. A lot of great information in there for landowners, A lot of information about the royalty situation, the class action, a lot of things going on there. So make sure you're staying tuned for the upcoming shows. We'll be updating you in a lot more detail. But it's a great resource. And whether you're looking for representation or looking for information, check out pagasleaseattorney.com and pipelineattorney.com. If you have a pipeline agreement, I'm telling you, check it out. Give you some points, some things to be thinking about. As I say all the time, if you have a pipeline agreement, make sure you are getting representation. Make sure you are getting representation. Whether it's me or somebody else, you need to be getting representation. I've done pipeline agreements now, negotiations with approximately 50 different companies all across the state of Pennsylvania. Approximately 50 companies. So I'm telling you, I've dealt with many, many companies. You need to get representation. You need to get some experienced representation because there's so much that you can do with these agreements today. You need to maximize your situation. You need to understand your rights. You need to understand what you can do, and you need to take full advantage of your situation. Not saying this happens anytime by any means, but I've seen offers go from $15,000, $20,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And people will just sign these offers because of the promises or representations made by the landman and have no idea that you had this ability to either say no or potentially significantly increase the price. It depends on your circumstance. It always depends on your circumstance. But you really need to understand your circumstance and your leverage. And you need somebody working for you that understands those things. You need to. I can't stress it enough because, I talk about wanting to talk about what I deal with all the time or what's come up over the past weeks. I mean, I'm doing more pipeline agreements and royalty work, but more pipeline agreements than anything. And it amazes me what companies continue to give to landowners as an offer and what landowners will just sign. Because in almost every case, we are able to significantly increase the terms at least, and many times the compensation, but it depends on your circumstance. And I assure you that you owe it to yourself to find that out. And I'm saying not as a big giant commercial for me, hey, look, you want to call me? Great. If I can help you, I'd love to. If I'm the right guy for you, that's wonderful. But whether it's me or somebody else, you need to be working on these things. You can't just sign that agreement. You can't do it. All right, sorry about that. I am Attorney Doug Clark. This is All Things Marcellus. Again, I'm here every Sunday from 8 to 9. Now, I'm talking about leases here. And talking about recently in Tioga County, I'm getting a lot of calls from landowners who have leases that have not even expired yet, that are within a few months and sometimes a month, sometimes 5 months or more, but are about to expire. I'm also getting calls from landowners who had leases that already expired, and they're being presented new offers. And the offer has been about $1,000 per acre and 12.5%. Now, very important to understand that 12.5% is the state minimum. Until recently, I hadn't had a client sign at 12.5% in years, in a very, very long time. I did have a client break that streak. It pained me, but that's what he wanted to do. One person who broke that streak, but it's really hard to sign at 12.5% when it's the state minimum, and you haven't seen that type of number out there in years, in quite some time. So that's a tricky position. And everybody is in a different circumstance. So I'm not saying that everybody just blanketly rejects or accepts anything. I'm always saying you have to understand your circumstances. The show and advice, it's advice in general, but never advice for a specific individual. So here's the offer. You're sitting out there and say you have 20 acres and you get an offer. You have a lease already in effect that's paying you, if there were royalties, it's a 15% royalty lease. Well, now here comes a new offer, and they said, well, we'll give you $1,000, but the royalty is 12.5%. Well, you say, okay, I have 20 acres. That's $20,000. That would be nice. Well, I got to pay taxes on that as ordinary income. So that takes a bite out of that. But hey, I don't have that money now. What do I do? Do I sign this? What if I sign this, will that mean they won't develop my property at 15%? That you'll just wait and use the new lease? I don't think that's, again, this is speculation. I don't like to go too far down the speculation path, but I don't think that's going to be, the company says, aha, we got them, so now we're not going to develop at 15, we'll just wait. I think that in almost all cases, and we'll just be cautious and say in most cases, they're not going to develop this property under the current lease. So what you see is a landowner is faced with the tough decision. Then a decision that many landowners are making and some are not making. So again, this isn't specific advice, but maybe you wait and see, if my example before, if everybody were presented this top lease offer or a new lease at $1,000 and 12.5%, and they all don't sign, every single person that's given that offer does not sign, what is the company going to do? Well, if they want that acreage, if they want the acreage and they want it bad enough, they're going to increase these costs or the compensation. They're going to increase it. But there comes a risk. If your other neighbors, if people start signing around you, they're all signing at 12.5%, you may end up getting the squeeze put on you where the company says, well, you know what? We're going to drop this to $500 and maybe we'll drop it to $250, and they'll try to put the squeeze on you and say, if you don't sign, we're going to just develop around you. So again, you really need to understand your situation. But the tone and the feel that I get out there is, and understandably, landowners aren't crazy about signing at 12.5%. You can go online, you can look around, and I always say caution when you're going online, because you got to make sure, first off, it's true, the information, because anybody can type anything. All you need to do is have the ability to type, and you can put something out there. So you got to be very careful, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. But the truth of the matter is people have not been signing for 12.5%. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't in your case. You got to look at it, and you maybe need some advice, or you need to talk to somebody. So that's a situation we're starting to see out there. However, and this is when I want to get information out there, I'm starting to get some whiffs of some competition out there. Again, can't go into too much detail on this. I mean, I can't say that I'm sitting here with a lease in front of me for somebody that was offered in Tioga County at a higher percent. I can also say that I've had a client offered a better offer than the 1,000 and 12.5%, and I'm hoping that that's what we're going to see as the trend. I also have caught wind, but I haven't seen it, of yet a third company making offers in that area. But again, that's a rumor. I haven't been able to verify it. I suspect by next week I will. But competition is always going to be good. I talk a lot of times. What happens is you could be sitting in a great geological area, meaning that there's going to be a lot of gas produced from this area, and that there's good information that this is a very nice area for gas production. But if there's no other company that's making you an offer, and one company dominates that area, so there's no reason that any other company is going to come in and make you an offer, because they're not going to be able to drill in this one little area. Then they would have to get pipeline infrastructure or be able to purchase into any existing pipeline infrastructure. So if you're sitting in the center of an area dominated by one company, you need to be very careful, and you need to understand what your leverage is, but you still need to maximize it. So you could be sitting on some of the most valuable land that's out there, but if there's nobody else making you a lease or offering you a lease, that's a tough circumstance for you. So there's some things we look at there. Where is your property? How are units being formed? Are you within a proposed unit? Would they need to drill underneath you, or would it be advantageous? I mean, despite what anybody ever thinks, a company never actually needs to drill anywhere. They don't need to drill underneath you. And I have clients all the time say, well, the company really needs me. They need me. Unfortunately, typically they don't need you. So you need to understand these things. And so, but I say that, but sometimes there is some hidden leverage, and there's some circumstances where we are able to do some things for you to either maybe get you some more money, to get you better terms in your agreement, because it's not always the money. We want to look at other terms as well. Can you avoid surface operations? Meaning, can you avoid having that roadway, that well site, or those pipelines on your property? Can you set yourself up where if there are surface operations, you have a good amount of control, or a lot of control, excuse me, that you have control, that you have a say. Where is this going to be? And then sometimes we can give you complete control. Sometimes we can give you some input, but not complete control. But you need to understand those items and decide, okay, with all of these different circumstances, is this the right offer for me? So we need to look at all of these things. So back to the Tioga County situation. So what we have out there, I think what we're seeing is that a lot of landowners are saying, boy, that 12.5% on an offer, that's a really tough pill to swallow. So the company's going to be back and say, all right, how valuable is this acreage? How many people are we getting to sign? What do our maps look like? Are any other companies coming in because people aren't signing, or because acreage is freeing up? When we talk about these people who have maybe, whatever parcel, even a substantial parcel in an area dominated by one company, well, that's very problematic to try to maximize all these terms. It can be, I should say, but it certainly doesn't help when you have no competition. But if you have a whole area of a county, you have a whole part of a county or townships that are expiring around the same time, well, now that may generate some competition. Because now, especially if the company has some other leaseholds in the area, that may generate competition, which, again, is great for the landowner. So now, what do we need to do? We need to be looking at, what is this competition? Which company is going to be the best for us? What can we do to make sure that we're going to get the best possible agreement? Timing is very tricky. Do I sign now? Do I wait? How do I handle that? What I always say is, look, my job, the way I see it, is to frame these issues, to explain what your options are, and to make sure that you're thinking about these different options and you're understanding, what these issues are that you should be thinking about. Now, there are times when I can offer direct recommendations, but it's very difficult to say to somebody when they're in the brink of retirement and they're looking at a potential check for $100,000 or $200,000, hey, you should hold out and wait. And then all of a sudden, if these numbers do go down, or if they go away, well, that's very difficult for me, a guy like me, to sleep at night. So we want to talk about those risks on either side. Now, at the same time, you have a landowner say they were offered $100,000 and you say, take it. Then a month later, the company says, geez, nobody else is signing, so we're going to raise the bonus by 50%. So now, and maybe we're going to increase the royalty from 12.5% to 15%. Well, now that gentleman or lady looks back and says, oh man, I could have had a lease at $150,000 and 15%, but I jumped in too soon. So those are really risky scenarios where the key is to understand those risks and do the best evaluation you can, and then make the right decision for yourself. And the more information that you have, the more quality, credible, and reliable information you have, the better decision you're going to make for you and your circumstances. Okay, I'm up against it again. I am Attorney Doug Clark. This is All Things Marcellus. I'm here every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m., and I'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark. And again, I'm here every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. I have been doing the show, All Things Marcellus, since August of 2010. I represent landowners and only landowners in oil and gas related matters. And if you ever do want to give me a call, or if you're looking for representation, we try not to do the show as a big commercial. We want to get people informed, but you can always contact me at 570-307 0702, and encourage you go check out pagasleaseattorney.com, our main website. If you have a pipeline offer, you must go to pipelineattorney.com. Whether you're looking for representation or not, some good things to be thinking about and understanding there. And like I said, I'm meeting again with my web designer this week, so we're excited about that. We're going to be doing some new things with the website, so make sure you keep checking back. We're going to have a lot of nice updates there, and I think it's going to be really good for everybody. So, okay, talking about gas leasing, I've been talking about Tioga County and some leasing issues in general, and I want to point out, I talked about Tioga County, where an area where it's starting to become where leases are starting to expire, and the potential of landowners getting some more leverage because larger areas are becoming unleased, and the possibility of competition. That's a really good situation for landowners. But you want to watch out too, who's making you this offer. And what we start to see, and I've been called by people in the past and saying, hey, we have this company, or, we're looking at, maybe you could point some people in our direction. And of course I never do, but, we're looking, we have this we're going to lease people, and then we're going to sell these leases or assign these leases to producers. And then your client is going to be able to get a higher royalty percentage through us, and we're going to pass it on to the company, essentially looking to operate as a broker. Me personally, makes me a little nervous, makes me a lot nervous. You want to watch and you want to look at, who is it, if you're considering a lease, that you may be signing for. And usually, just a little bit of Google research can give you a pretty good idea. There's a lot of, hedge funds, people call them, but investment companies, whatever you want to call them, where people with money get together and they create a pool of money, and they go out and they say, okay, well, let's get some leases in this area. We'll call ourselves, some sort of oil and gas related name, and even though we have no intention of drilling, maybe we've never even drilled a well in the past, but we want to get people to sign these leases, and then we'll sell or assign them to these bigger companies who actually will operate on the property, and we'll sell and we'll say, okay, we'll give you these leases, but you have to pay us a certain price per acre. Maybe they'll have what's called an overriding royalty, so a royalty interest, where then, say if they sign you at, hypothetically 13.5%, 14%, something like that, and then they sell it to a company, and the company pays them 1%, 2%, whatever royalty in the future. So you got to be looking, and you got to be, you got to really think about these issues. Who are you dealing with? Is this a company that you want to deal with? Because what if they can't sell it to an oil and gas company? What if they end up just sitting on it and they're not able to get, pass it on? And now here you are, you thought maybe you got a little bit better lease. It was more than what the producing company was offering you, like a bigger company who drills. It's more than what they were offering you, but it's no good if you're sitting there and a company holds your lease that's never going to develop it, and they can't sell it or pass it on to the bigger company. So if they're a company that's out there and they don't have a big block of leases and they're just picking up parcels here and there, it's possible that producer may not accept a deal from them or a lease from them. And maybe that company who got your lease, who had no intention of drilling, maybe they're asking for too much. So the producing company says, you know what, we're not going to deal with you. And now you're sitting there, maybe you got a couple extra dollars at the beginning. Maybe you got 1% or 2% higher royalty percent. But you're sitting there now in no man's land because the producing company doesn't hold your lease. So you're stuck. There's nothing you're going to be able to do about that except hope an agreement is reached. Or maybe, and this is a huge maybe, that after this lease expires, maybe you can get in with the oil and gas producing company in your area. The problem is, companies as a general rule, once they form these units and they start producing gas, if they don't need to, they don't have to bring you into this unit, that can be a big problem for you. Because think about this. Say you have, and I don't put too much into these numbers as far as acres. I'm just going to use these for example. But say a company forms a unit that has 800 acres, pulling that number out of the sky. So you have a unit that has 800 acres. And here you are, you're a person that has 25 acres. and you're within that physical unit, meaning that if you drew a rectangle, that unit contains 800 acres are inside the rectangle. And actually, your 25 acres are also inside of that rectangle. So the reality is, inside of that rectangle is actually 825 acres. However, since your 25 was never leased to the company that's producing, we can pick any company. Your 25 acres is inside of this rectangle, but the company that's drilled in the rectangle that's formed this unit doesn't hold your lease. They hold the other 800 acres in leases, but they don't hold yours. So now here we are 5 years out, and your lease expires. And you say, knock on the door, you call the company, you send them a letter and say, hey guys, my lease is expired. I'd like to be in this unit. Look, here's the map. My property is inside of this 800-acre unit, this rectangle, but I'm not currently receiving royalties. I'm not included. Well, the company says, unfortunately, sir, in many cases they'll say this, unfortunately, sir, we're not going to be drilling under your property. There's no law in Pennsylvania that requires us to include your property into this 800-acre unit. And if we brought you into this 800-acre unit, we would then have to change all the paperwork. We'd have to change the size of the unit. It would now be 825 acres. We would have to do new division orders for everybody. We'd have to notify all of these other landowners in this unit that we have decreased your interest in the unit because we have added 25 acres. The negative here is that your 25 acres is not in the end going to generate any more royalties for this rectangle, for this created unit, because you're already in there. They're not going to drill underneath you. You're not going to result in them being able to drill more wells or longer wells. You're just kind of stuck in this unit in no man's land. So you're not going to benefit the company or the other landowners in the unit in my example. And I know that gets tricky, so I want to make sure I'm explaining that clearly. And remember, this is one example. We're talking about the dangers of if you lease to a company that is not able to reach an agreement with that producer and they want to sell or assign your lease and they're not going to produce, or if you're holding out and you decide later on that you want to be leased and want to be included in this unit. If there's an existing unit, and these units, if you looked at a map, often look like rectangles, and that's why I'm talking about rectangle. So if you're inside of that rectangle, think about the unit being a blank piece of paper, an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and your 25 acres is on that paper, and that paper consists of the entire size of the paper would be 800 acres. So your 25 acres is inside of there, but they did not, when the company formed the unit, since they didn't own your lease, even though there's 825 acres available on that sheet of paper, your 25 acres wasn't included. So that unit, when it's filed at the courthouse, when it's designed, it shows only 800 acres being in the unit. Even though your 25 is in that mapped out area, because you weren't leased to them and because they didn't pick up your lease, you're sitting there inside that area, but you're not included in the unit and you're not going to get royalties. So the other 800 acres are getting royalties as wells are drilled and produced. Now you decide, maybe your old lease expired, maybe you decide now, hey, I want to enter into a lease. You can go to the company that has this unit and say, hey, company, look, my 25 acres are within this unit that you're producing from. I'd like to have a lease with you so I can start getting royalties. And the company, in a lot of cases, and we're seeing this, may say to you, hey, I'm sorry about this, but we do not need your acreage. We're not going to drill under you. You do not give us the ability to drill longer wells. We've already drilled around you. We've not violated the law. There's no law that requires that we include you. There is no forced pooling, and that would be an example where forced pooling would benefit this person. And sometimes forced pooling can be a very good thing. That's a whole other show. But there's no law that says that we have to do this, and you're not going to benefit us, and you're not going to benefit all the other landowners who own those 800 acres within the unit. And if we wanted to put you in, or we did, we would have to change everything in the unit. We would have to say now it's 825. We'd have to decrease each and every landowner's interest in the unit, and companies don't want to do that. So you need to be very careful, whether you're holding out, whether you're deciding, do you want to lease to some company that was just newly formed, that hasn't been drilling, and you're sitting out there, like in my Tioga example, and say you have this shell offer, and you say, wow, here's this new company out of nowhere that's offering me a little bit more. Well, I'm going to take a little more. A little more is better, right? Well, maybe, but maybe you need to be careful. And you got to look at these issues. It's not always which landman puts the highest compensation offer on the table. Think about this too. If you're a company who's looking to take or buy leases from landowners and then shift them, flip them, sell them, assign them to a big company, what type of lease do you want to get from a landowner? You want to get the cleanest lease possible, meaning the lease that's going to have the best terms for the company and the worst terms for the landowner. When I say terms, I'm talking about they want to be able to say, hey, knock on the door company, hey, look, we have all these leases we'd like to sell to you. Well, if you had a bunch of leases that said you can't operate on the surface of the property, well, the company's not going to like that. They don't want to have leases that are going to say we can't drill here and are very restrictive. But if you say, hey, look, I want to sell you these leases, and these leases are very company friendly. There's not many restrictions or any restrictions at all as to how you can operate. Well, a company's going to say, that sounds a little bit better. That entices me some more. So think about that. You might be getting a few dollars now, but these guys are really motivated of giving you the least restrictive lease, the best lease for the company. On the flip side of that, they may say, okay, landowner, we want to get your lease, and we know the company won't give you certain terms. We'll give them to you. Here, we'll give you something extra. We'll say you can't operate on the surface of the property. We'll say you can set back operations 1,000 feet from your house. We'll give you these terms because we want to get you to sign and not sign with the company. But then when they go to the company and that lease is too restrictive, the company may say, thanks, but no thanks. That lease is too restrictive. So again, a lot of things to think about here. You have to be careful. You got to know who you're dealing with. You have to know what your options are, and you have to make the right decision for yourself. You also want to know, what are other people doing in your area? I personally would not want to be one of the only people signed to a lease by some company that I've never heard of, and it was just formed or is an investment company just out there buying leases. If you're the only one in that circumstance, you really have a potential problem, especially if you don't have a lot of acreage. And I mean, a lot of acreage could be hundreds of acres. Very careful. You must be very careful in these circumstances. Okay, I'll be right back. You're listening to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark, here every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. Be right back. Welcome back to All Things Marcellus with me, Attorney Doug Clark of the Clark Law Firm. Again, I'm located at 1563 Main Street in Peckville. I represent landowners and only landowners. Been doing this radio show since August of 2010. And, if you're interested in representation, you can always contact me at 570-307-0702. Again, I don't want to make this too commercialized, but, if you are interested, you can always give us a call. And just to say, I have clients all across the state, and I talk about these issues. A big part of the evaluation is, what's going on in your area. So it's important that you have somebody that has this experience and has, again, if it's not me, it's not me. But you want to make sure that you have somebody, because more importantly than ever is the experience and understanding today's market. I can't say that enough. Today's market. I recently went to this seminar, an oil and gas seminar, and they have them in the state, and there's one that they do, a major one every year. And I went to the first one, I don't know if it was 5 years, 6 years ago, and boy, they have these giant rooms, and there's these dividers in the rooms. And the first one I went to, there must have been 4 of these giant rooms, and speakers and microphones, and there were so many lawyers there. Could make some jokes there, but so many lawyers. And then I went to this last seminar, and I think there was only maybe one room. One. Like, my point is that lawyers have really fallen off as this is developed, as there's not all this leasing everywhere across the state. It's become much more nuanced, where you really need to understand what you're doing. To me, it's not an area to be dabbling in, especially today. We talk about, I talked earlier about the pipeline right-of-way agreements. If you don't know and you don't understand that leverage, and if your lawyer doesn't, and it goes both ways. If your lawyer or you think that you have a lot more leverage than you do, you could end up getting burned and be very disappointed. If you evaluate your leverage and you under-evaluate it, you could leave tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table that you may miss out on and didn't even know they existed. Now, nobody's perfect, and nobody can evaluate, and I certainly can't evaluate leverage perfectly in every single case, but it's about knowing what information you need, knowing how to evaluate that information, having the discussions and communication as to what these issues are and what is the basis for framing these issues and properly evaluating these issues. That's critical, and that can be a difference. Again, if you screw it up one way, you can lose everything that you might have wanted. If you overestimate, that's what would occur. But if you underestimate, well, then you may leave a lot on the table. And I'm talking about money, but we're talking also about terms. A simple example that I can give you. Some agreements say they can put as many pipelines in as they want. Say you have a pipeline agreement that offers you $100,000. Well, you sign that. You're getting $100,000. Say they come back in 5 years and put a second line in. Well, if you didn't know that you could get a term that said for the second line you also get $100,000, you just lost $100,000 in 5 years. Now, maybe they come back in 7 years and put another line in, and you don't have a term that says every line they put in you get at least the same consideration or same money. Well, now you just lost $300,000 or $200,000. You got one, but you lost two. That's a super, super simple example. But landowners are signing those agreements all the time. And if you don't know to ask for that, you don't get it. And sometimes what happens is we can get more money the second pipeline. There are so many things that you can do. And that's what I say, after doing this, about 50 different companies, you see what companies will do. And I've represented landowners with a lot of different ways that they look at things. So I've seen people push it to the brink and lose deals, fully informed that that could occur, but that's what they elected to do. They wanted to roll the dice and see what they could do. And then I've seen people roll the dice and get money that I just shake my head and say, wow, I never thought that we would ever be able to get that amount of money. And you've seen people ask for just a little bit more and don't get it. So it's all about learning from experience, understanding, what's potentially possible, understanding your leverage, framing these issues, getting the good information so you can evaluate it for yourself and what your circumstances are. And if you don't have somebody helping you who can evaluate your circumstances in those ways, well, there's a really good chance that you're going to make a decision that's going to be costly in either you lose something that you would have wanted, and you thought you had some ability to go and demand this super high money, and it goes away, and you look back and say, boy, I wish I wouldn't have chased that away because I wanted that deal. I just thought, or my lawyer thought we could get more. Or on the flip side, you enter into the agreement, and I guess maybe the ignorance is bliss, where you never realized that more money was available. But a lot of people, and that's what we see even more often, and it just, again, these companies have a lot of money, and we want to make sure that you're maximizing your circumstance, because believe me, they're looking to maximize theirs. And also, keep in mind that it's not just money. Money is the easiest thing. A lot of people can easily, obviously, most people can easily relate to money, but it's also about those terms. Where is the pipeline going to go? On a lease, how close to my house can they operate? How much of a shut-in payment am I going to get? Can I get any of this Pew clause protection? Do I need it? What does that mean to me? What about my royalty language? There's royalty language that if you don't know to ask, and we see this unfortunately far too often, that you might be able to obtain and can obtain in a lot of cases, well, that can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases millions of dollars. And if you're not getting the right assistance and you don't know what to ask for, those are the type of things that you could be missing out on. Again, I can't stress it enough. It's not every case. Everything I say is general information, but it's not general information as far as getting good advice and working to make sure that you understand what's going on and you understand the issues and you're taking advantage of your situation. Again, I am Attorney Doug Clark. This is All Things Marcellus, here every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. And I just want to finish with, I talked about this Tioga County, what I'm seeing out there, but remember, too, doing a lot of leasing now in other counties and doing a lot in Susquehanna County. And what we're seeing there is generally we have a lot less competition, and in most cases, no competition. So when a company comes to you and gives you an offer, well, in some cases, some companies are still pretty flexible in the terms. Other companies are kind of putting their hand down or fist down and saying, well, this is it. This is all you can do. Well, what does that mean? Do you understand the lease? Do you understand if you sign the lease, what may happen in the future? I still say to people, do you understand royalties, how they're going to be paid? There's still this evaluation process. So if I have a client and says, hey, here's what this offer is, they say they won't give me anything else. Well, we'll inquire to make sure that, that's true. And then we'll sit down. We'll take the hour, whatever that time is, sit down and say, okay, here's what this lease means. Here's what I see from people who have leases like this or people who are having development. Here's what you can expect as far as potential development and how development occurs. I'm not going to tell you how much money you're going to get royalty-wise, because anyone that does that, I've said this many times, either doesn't know what they're talking about or is a liar. One of those two. I have landowners with 100 acres getting a few $1,000s a month in royalties. I have landowners with 10 acres getting $8,000 and $10,000 a month royalties. So there's some ways that you can get an idea, but nobody can tell you that. And every client that I have who's leasing or getting to go into development, they're all asking, and who wouldn't, what can I expect in royalties? And I explain to them, what my thoughts are and why I can't give you this exact information, but in detail so you understand, oh, wow. And everybody after the conversation says, okay, I understand. And then you go in and you say, okay, under these circumstances, if I can't have these other terms, and this is what I'm being offered, and this is what I can potentially expect, and here's what the potential negatives are by doing this lease. But the positives, which the company are going to point out quickly for you, is whatever bonus they're paying you, but that promise of future royalties. And if that guy or girl, landman, is telling you you're going to get this or you're going to get that, again, either they're lying or they don't know what they're talking about. One of the two, and neither one are good. So you need to evaluate your circumstances, just like in everything else, to get the right decision for you. All right, I'm up against it. Again, I'm Attorney Doug Clark. This is All Things Marcellus. I am here every Sunday from 8 to 9 a.m. check out PAGasleaseattorney.com. Check out the old shows. I'm going to talk about royalties, I believe, next week. So make sure you tune in. Have a great week, everyone.